There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. It sets in after you've been let down enough times. After the colleague who smiled at you while undermining you behind closed doors. After the friend who disappeared the moment you needed them. After reading the headlines for 1 week too many. It is the tiredness of trying to believe in people and finding the evidence thin. And at some point, a thought arrives that feels almost like relief. Maybe this is just what people are. Maybe the kindness was always performance, the generosity always calculation, and the warmth always conditional. Maybe the sensible thing, the mature thing, is to stop expecting much and protect yourself accordingly. That thought is understandable. It is also, quietly, one of the most costly conclusions a person can reach. This video is not going to tell you that people are wonderful and everything works out. That would be dishonest, and you would know it immediately. What it will do is make a case for something more precise, that the ability to believe in human goodness, held carefully and with open eyes, is not naivety. It is one of the more demanding psychological achievements available to us. Let us start with what cynicism actually is, because it tends to disguise itself as clear thinking. Cynicism feels like realism. It feels like you have finally stopped being fooled, like you have graduated from some earlier, softer version of yourself into someone who sees things as they are. There is even a kind of social reward for it. Cynical people are often treated as sophisticated, as though skepticism about human nature signals intelligence. But look more closely, and a different picture emerges. Cynicism is not neutral observation. It is a conclusion drawn in advance before the evidence arrives. It decides that people will disappoint, that motives are always self-serving, that warmth is always a transaction, and then it filters every new experience through that lens. It is not seeing clearly. It is seeing selectively, in a way that confirms what pain has already taught you to expect. Immanuel Kant argued that every human being carries an inherent dignity that cannot be reduced to their usefulness or their worst behavior. That dignity is not something people earn through consistent performance. It is something they possess by virtue of being capable of reason, choice, and moral reflection. Kant was not naive about human failure. He wrote extensively about the crooked timber of humanity, about how difficult it is for people to act well consistently. But he held that the capacity for goodness was real, and that treating it as real was not sentimentality. It was a moral commitment that shaped how you moved through the world. That distinction matters. Believing in human goodness does not mean believing that every person will behave well in every situation. It means believing that the capacity is genuinely there, and that how you relate to people either calls that capacity forward or pushes it further away. Hannah Arendt spent much of her intellectual life thinking about what happens when human beings fail catastrophically, when ordinary people participate in extraordinary cruelty. Her conclusions were disturbing precisely because they were not about monsters. They were about the conditions under which ordinary moral perception collapses. But Arendt also wrote about something she called natality, the idea that every human being represents a new beginning, a capacity to act in ways that have never happened before. For Arendt, this was not optimism in the cheerful sense. It was a philosophical recognition that human beings are not simply products of their circumstances or their worst impulses. They retain the ability to begin something new, to choose differently, to surprise. Holding on to that recognition after betrayal or disappointment is not easy. It requires a kind of active effort, what you might call disciplined openness. Not the openness of someone who has never been hurt, but the openness of someone who has been hurt and has decided, deliberately, not to let that pain become the final word on what people are. Erich Fromm, in his thinking about love and human connection, drew a distinction that is useful here. He described the difference between a passive, receptive orientation toward the world, waiting to receive goodness, waiting to be proven right or wrong about people, and an active orientation in which you bring something to your relationships, rather than simply measuring what comes back. Fromm's insight, drawn from his work on what mature love actually requires, was that care, responsibility, respect, and genuine knowledge of another person are not things that happen to you. They are things you practice. and that practice changes not only your relationships, but your perception. When you approach people with active attention rather than passive judgment, you begin to notice things that cynicism would have filtered out. The small acts of consideration, the quiet courage, the moments when someone chose decency when they could have chosen otherwise. This is not about lowering your standards or ignoring red flags. It is about the difference between vigilance and closure. Vigilance keeps you alert to what is actually happening. Closure decides in advance and stops looking. There is a psychological pattern worth naming here. When people have been hurt, especially in early relationships, or in situations where trust was badly misplaced, the mind sometimes develops what you might call a protective pessimism. It learns to expect the worst, so that the worst, when it arrives, does not land as hard. This feels like self-protection, and in some contexts it genuinely is. But protective pessimism has a cost that is easy to miss. It does not only protect you from disappointment, it also protects you from connection, from the experience of being genuinely surprised by someone's kindness, from the particular kind of warmth that comes from trusting someone and finding that trust honored. Over time, it can leave you technically safe and quietly impoverished. The goal is not to dismantle your defenses entirely. It is to develop something more nuanced, what you might call calibrated trust. Trust that is proportional to what you actually know about a person, that grows as evidence accumulates, that can be extended carefully without being surrendered wholesale. This is not the trust of someone who has never been burned. It is the trust of someone who has learned to distinguish between the person in front of them and the people who hurt them before. There is also something worth saying about what believing in human goodness does for you. Not just for the people around you. Research in psychology consistently finds that people who maintain a generally positive orientation toward others, not a naive one, but a considered one, tend to report higher levels of meaning, stronger social bonds, and greater resilience when things go wrong. This is not because the world rewards optimism automatically. It is because the stance you take toward people shapes the kinds of interactions you invite, the risks you are willing to take, and the depth of connection you allow yourself to experience. Cynicism protects you from certain kinds of pain, but it also forecloses certain kinds of joy, and over a lifetime, that foreclosure accumulates into something that looks a great deal like loneliness. So how do you actually hold on to belief in human goodness without becoming someone who ignores reality? You start by separating the question of human capacity from the question of human behavior. People are capable of remarkable things: generosity, courage, honesty under pressure, care for strangers. They are also capable of cruelty, cowardice, and self-deception. Both are true. Believing in goodness does not require you to pretend the second list does not exist. It requires you to refuse to let the second list cancel the first. You practice noticing, not in a forced, relentlessly positive way, but genuinely, paying attention to the moments when people choose well, when they extend themselves for someone else, when they tell a difficult truth or show up without being asked. These moments are not rare. They are simply easy to miss when you are not looking for them. And you extend trust incrementally, proportionally, with your eyes open. Not because everyone deserves it equally, but because the alternative, closing off entirely, costs you more than it saves. Kant believed that treating people as ends in themselves, rather than as means to your own comfort or confirmation, was the foundation of moral life. Arendt believed that the human capacity to begin again was real and worth honoring. Fromm believed that love and connection were not things that happened to you, but things you actively built. None of them were naive. All of them had seen enough of human failure to know better, and all of them chose, deliberately, to keep believing in what people were capable of. That choice is available to you too, not as a feeling, but as a practice, not as innocence, but as something harder and more honest, a decision to stay open, carefully, in a world that will sometimes make that difficult. That is not naivety, that is courage. And if this spoke to a part of you that rarely gets heard, stay with that feeling for a moment. You are not broken because you feel deeply. You are only beginning to understand yourself. Subscribe to Inside the Labyrinth for more reflections on the hidden patterns of the human mind.